Tom Riddle stood in the bowels of Borgin and Burke's with a grim determination chiseled into his handsome features. His reflection in a dusty mirror revealed the sharp lines of his face and the uncanny gleam of his dark eyes. He was no longer a starry-eyed Hogwarts student searching for secrets of immortality. He was no longer just Tom. He was becoming something else, someone else. Fragments of half-forbidden lore about Horcruxes whirled in his mind. He had scoured the Hogwarts library's restricted section, pried knowledge from the most hallowed corners of wizarding antiquity, and slunk through Nocturne Alley collecting dangerous texts. He believed he understood the concept. Murder tears the soul, and with that tear, a wizard might lodge part of his essence into an object, granting a twisted kind of eternal life. In theory, Horcruxes were the perfect anchor to the mortal plane. Tom Riddle had prepared the incantations meticulously. He wasn't about to let anything go awry. After all, he saw mistakes as weaknesses, and Tom prided himself on perfection. However, arcane knowledge has its pitfalls, tiny details the proud might overlook. Late into a moonless night, he held a tarnished silver dagger in his hand. A trembling wizard he'd ensnared with promises of power knelt nearby. The incantation had been practiced in hush, whispered to ensure no eavesdropper could glean its words. Under flickering lamplight, Tom completed the murder and felt his soul wrench. For a moment, he suppressed a wave of nausea. This was the last physical symptom of a morality he was discarding. Then came the critical act, the binding of the torn piece of his soul into the ring he had chosen. There was a faint shimmer, an intangible shift in the air, but the moment passed too smoothly. No flash of triumphant power, no dramatic crescendo of dark magic. A lesser wizard might have been relieved, but for Tom, the silence was unsettling. A Horcrux was supposed to be a monumental achievement, and this was quiet. Perhaps it was simply subtle, he rationalized. Darkness could be silent as well as violent. Satisfied enough, he left Borgin and Burke's behind, not realizing he was stepping away from the site of his greatest failure, though he wouldn't know it for years to come. Years slid past like specters in the night. Tom Riddle's transformation into Lord Voldemort was nearly complete. He had carefully destroyed barriers to power, recruited ambitious and fearful witches and wizards, and spun a reputation so horrifying that even his name was cursed on trembling tongues. Along the way, he created more Horcruxes, or so he believed. The Gaunt family ring, the diary, the locket, the cup, the diadem, and, eventually, the unintentional Horcrux he would craft the night he attacked the Potters. Each time, a fresh murder sliced away another sliver of his soul. Each time, he repeated the ritual, reciting black incantations, convinced he was stockpiling anchors to immortality. But in the labyrinthine complexities of dark magic, sometimes the subtlest error begets catastrophic results. His first sign that things might not be as foolproof as he believed came on a quiet evening in the hidden depths of his fortress. Alone, Voldemort extended a long pale finger towards the gaunt ring, murmuring to sense the fragment of his soul within. He tried to coax from the ring a flicker of resonance, something that would confirm his immortality was secure. The ring seemed inert, as lifeless as any inert piece of metal. Instead of the comforting pulse of tethered life, there was nothing. Perhaps it was simply masked by old wards. Voldemort had always been paranoid, but ambition often outshouted caution. Refusing to believe he could fail, he carried on. He told himself the protective spells were so thorough that they even shielded the Horcrux from himself. This small doubt, however, planted a seed in his mind. He ordered his Death Eaters to keep watch but confided in none of them about his concerns. Outside the Dark Lord's fortress, the wizarding world was quaking. Whispers flew of the unstoppable monster forging alliances with giants and werewolves. The ministry was frightened, but it remained an open secret that only one wizard, Albus Dumbledore, stood a chance of opposing Voldemort. Yet, with his illusions of immortality, Voldemort thought he had nothing to fear. It was on Halloween night that Voldemort's arrogance collided with destiny. The prophecy that a child born at the end of July would thwart him had led the Dark Lord to Godric's Hollow. He found James and Lily Potter in a desperate standoff. In that final confrontation, Lily Potter's sacrificial magic shielded young Harry from the killing curse. In a single burst of green fire, the unstoppable Lord Voldemort was reduced to a disembodied wraith. He should have died, but the rituals he had performed, he believed, would keep him tethered to the mortal world. Indeed, even after the curse rebounded, he found himself lingering as a spirit-like form, cursed to wander. This was the moment he took as proof the Horcruxes had worked. Yet if he had listened closely, he might have heard the hollow echo, the emptiness in that intangible existence. There was no strength behind it, no comfort of a fully anchored spirit. He was clinging to life through a more subtle synergy of foul magic, fear, and the echoes of prophecy. The Horcruxes he thought he possessed were mere shadows of what they should have been. His essence drifted into the darkest forests of Albania. Through haunted nights and freezing days, he lurked in the gloom, growing weaker, not stronger. Each attempt to tap into a Horcruxes might reveal only faint scraps of something ephemeral. The more he tried, the less he found. But denial burns bright in those who fear the truth. Voldemort assured himself that, once he had a body again, the glitch would fade. Albus Dumbledore, meanwhile, was left to puzzle over the half-truths swirling around the events of Godric's Hollow. He suspected a Horcrux existed. He had glimpsed something odd in Harry's scar, but knowledge of exactly how many anchors Voldemort had created remained elusive. In secret, Dumbledore began to investigate. He charted the old wizarding lines, traced Tom Riddle's footsteps, and discovered hints about the Gaunt family ring, the Slytherin locket, and Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Curiously, the deeper Dumbledore looked, the more questions piled up. Artifacts rumored to be bound to the Dark Lord seemed inert. The energy typically associated with such cursed objects was missing. To Dumbledore's bewilderment, it seemed Lord Voldemort had tried to create Horcruxes but somehow failed. Still, the old headmaster could not rest easy. Voldemort's existence remained an undeniable threat. Years later, dark rumors started to stir in the wizarding world once more. Sightings of a dark presence in Albania leaked through the underbelly of the magical community. Quirinius Quirrell, a timid defense against the dark arts professor, went traveling in search of exotic creatures and came back changed. He was discovered to be hosting Voldemort's spirit. With Quirrell at his disposal, Voldemort attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone from under Dumbledore's nose at Hogwarts. The stone offered true immortality, or at least the promise of resurrecting his body. Yet once again, fate favored Harry Potter. Quirrell was destroyed, and Voldemort was forced out into the ether. In the aftermath, the rumor mill churned fiercely. Some insisted that Harry Potter was no mere boy but a champion forged by an ancient prophecy. Others argued that Dumbledore had planned everything from the start. But in hidden corners of the magical world, those who prided themselves on knowing better whispered an even stranger theory, that Voldemort wasn't as immortal as he claimed. Narcissa Malfoy confronted her husband, Lucius, who had once boasted of holding the Dark Lord's enchanted diary. "Are you certain it's a Horcrux?" she asked one evening, her voice betraying the slightest tremor. "What if you're wrong?" Lucius sneered. "The Dark Lord never fails, but I'll keep it under wards, just in case." Unbeknownst to them, that diary was the keystone of Voldemort's plan to open the Chamber of Secrets. But, much like all Voldemort's other so-called Horcruxes, it had been improperly bound. The diary contained a faint echo of teenage Tom Riddle. Just enough of a presence to manipulate a victim, sure. But as for tethering a portion of his soul that could revive him, it was incomplete. There was no robust anchor, no stable chunk of Voldemort's soul coiled and waiting to return. Ginny Weasley ultimately found the diary. We know how that went. She was possessed, the basilisk roamed, but then the memory of Riddle was defeated by Harry, and the diary was destroyed. To the horror of Lucius Malfoy, it yielded none of the disastrous aftermath a true Horcrux might have unleashed. There was no monstrous shriek from a severed soul. There was no crippling blow to Voldemort's existence. The diary's destruction, while significant in fueling rumors, seemed more or less to have no real effect on the Dark Lord's intangible survival. It was the first big red flag the Death Eaters could no longer ignore. If that diary truly housed a portion of Voldemort's soul, its destruction should have affected their master. But no one felt anything. Had it ever been a Horcrux at all? Deep in the Death Eater's network of safe houses, Bellatrix Lestrange's furious loyalty clashed with creeping suspicion. She had once been the Dark Lord's most passionate follower, worshipping him with an almost fanatical reverence. If she had any inkling his immortality was a sham, she would have dismissed it as traitorous nonsense. But after the diary's destruction, Bellatrix began to brood over every interaction she'd had with her master. She recalled nights in the Dark Lord's presence when he'd seemed oddly tense while studying his precious relics. Initially, she attributed that tension to his vigilant guardianship. Now, she wondered if it was frustration, if he'd sensed that something was amiss. Meanwhile, Severus Snape, always the enigma, kept his own counsel. He had pledged himself to Dumbledore's cause out of love for Lily Potter, yet still feigned loyalty to the Dark Lord. In private, Dumbledore confronted him. "You suspect something about these Horcruxes, Severus?" said the headmaster quietly, the lines around his eyes etched with worry. "You've spoken about an uneasy air around the Dark Lord." Snape's black eyes flickered with guarded emotion. "I've seen him cast spells in private, incantations meant to commune with what should be fragments of his soul. It seems to trouble him that they do not respond as expected." Dumbledore stroked his long beard. "Could it be that he never truly succeeded in forging them?" "He believes he has," Snape said, his tone carefully even. "But I think he may be losing faith in his own success." Snape hesitated, considering how much to reveal. He knew that if Voldemort's Horcruxes were indeed failures, the Dark Lord's entire claim to immortality was based on a lie. This dangerous knowledge could empower Dumbledore, or it could set off a frantic escalation by Voldemort if he sensed the walls closing in. Nevertheless, Dumbledore pressed on, determined to learn more. "We must confirm it. If we can prove to the wizarding world that Voldemort is mortal, his grip of fear may loosen." Voldemort's ultimate return to a physical body took place in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. Under Peter Pettigrew's trembling hands, using Harry Potter's blood, the Dark Lord emerged from the cauldron as tall, pale, and dreadful as the nightmares that once haunted wizards. He expected a moment of triumphant confirmation from his Horcruxes, a resonating ring in his mind that would say, "You are anchored. You are complete." Instead, there was emptiness. A part of him sensed that what remained of his tattered soul had indeed re-entered his body, but there were no external tethers reinforcing his presence. Refusing to show weakness, Voldemort gloated over his rebirth, brandishing his wand at Harry Potter, forcing him into a duel. While the Death Eaters watched, he paraded his so-called immortality like a dark crown. But deep within the recesses of his resurrected consciousness, panic festered. When Harry miraculously escaped, the Dark Lord's temper exploded. He flung curses at tombstones, sending debris scattering in a wave of magical wrath. If these so-called Horcruxes had truly functioned, he reasoned, he would feel stronger, more than he'd ever been before. Instead, he felt every ache, every magical strain. Upon returning to his re-established fortress, Voldemort laid his long fingers on the gaunt ring. It remained cold to the touch. He questioned Pettigrew about the locket's whereabouts. He interrogated Malfoy about the diary. The more he heard, the more cracks in his illusions splintered open. The diary was destroyed, the ring inert, the cup apparently missing, and the locket was rumored stolen from its hiding spot. No matter how he tried, he could not deny the truth. The Horcrux ritual, which should have guaranteed him dominion over mortality, had failed. The question was, why? Cornered by his own mistakes, Voldemort delved deeper than ever into ancient dark magic. He scoured old volumes once locked away in the Department of Mysteries. He forced survivors of centuries-old wizarding families to reveal secrets that had never been written down. From these dark corners, he discovered a terrifying fact. Horcrux creation was not just about murder and a savage incantation. There was a precise alignment of intent, emotion, and sacrifice required. Any slight misstep, and the anchor would be incomplete. Incomplete Horcruxes might contain a ghostly echo but never a stable fragment of soul. They might manipulate a victim's mind, but they could not sustain the creator's spirit indefinitely. Tom Riddle, in his arrogance, had missed vital details. He had performed the rituals from a position of cold, clinical detachment. He believed all that was required was the mechanical side of murder. But the Horcrux demanded more. A truly resonant, twisted, sacrificial moment that bound the soul to the object like a brand. In simplest terms, he had not poured enough of his essence into those objects. He had refused to truly let go of each piece, ironically clinging to the very soul he was trying to sunder. Realizing this too late, the Dark Lord quaked with fury. He was mortal. Even worse, the wizarding world would discover his mortality if he showed weakness. Everything he had built on fear would unravel once his vulnerability was exposed. Though he tried to hide his existential terror, sharp-eyed followers like Snape and Bellatrix saw the frantic mania behind their master's scarlet eyes. They recognized the bruising truth. The invincible Lord Voldemort was just a man with a battered soul. As Voldemort plotted in panic, Dumbledore seized upon the advantage. He deduced that a being with no fully functioning Horcrux would be desperate for any means to fortify himself, whether that meant forging new ones or seeking alternative dark artifacts. Sensing the endgame was near, Dumbledore assembled the Order of the Phoenix. They would not wait for Voldemort to gain a second wind. Instead, they planned to confront him directly, to exploit the knowledge that he was mortal. No longer would they quake under illusions of his eternal return. Dumbledore's biggest move was to reveal selectively to the wizarding public, through trusted channels at the Daily Prophet and the Wisengamot, that Voldemort's immortality might be a hoax. These statements, cloaked in Dumbledore's typical careful wording, suggested that the fear surrounding the Dark Lord's unkillability was misplaced. He is powerful, Dumbledore admitted solemnly, but he is not unstoppable. A quiet wave of hope rippled through the wizarding world. Families that had hidden in fear of retribution began to rally. The Ministry, emboldened by the possibility that Voldemort could be defeated once and for all, pledged more resources to the fight. Even those under the Imperius Curse started showing signs of rebellion, for the knowledge that one can topple a tyrant is a potent tonic for courage. All the while, Dumbledore prepared Harry Potter, shaping him into a wizard capable of standing toe-to-toe with the man who had haunted his life. If ever there was a time to strike, it was now, while Voldemort reeled from the revelation that his greatest claim to superiority was a catastrophic failure. After months of strategic feints, half-battles, and infiltration missions, the final confrontation drew near. Voldemort retreated to a stronghold deep in the forbidding forests of Albania, the same region he'd once haunted as a spirit. The old fortress was layered with wards, enchantments, and the presence of acolytes who still clung to him, though their faith had been shaken by the incessant rumor, "The Dark Lord can die." Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and other Order members arrived under the cover of night. Guided by Dumbledore's knowledge, they breached layer after layer of wards, unraveling curses as swiftly as they were cast. A chaotic duel erupted amidst stone ruins and twisted trees. Death Eaters flung deadly hexes, but the newly emboldened defenders fought back with a ferocity that the Dark Lord's side had rarely encountered. Anxiety ran through Voldemort's ranks like a fever. They no longer had unwavering confidence that their master was eternal. For the first time, the tide shifted in the defenders' favor. Voldemort himself emerged in a blast of green fire, his eyes flaring with unhinged rage. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the bone white of his face. The intensity of his magical aura was undeniable, fueled by desperation. With a flick of his wand, he sent jets of lethal spells spiraling into the fray, forcing Dumbledore to conjure shimmering shields of light. Harry confronted the Dark Lord, heart pounding. He had faced him before, but never like this. Harry sensed the desperation in Voldemort's every movement, could see that the man was fighting less like an immortal tyrant and more like a cornered animal. The final duel between Harry and Voldemort shook the ancient halls of the fortress. Stone pillars cracked, windows shattered in a hail of magical blasts. Spells ricocheted, weaving a tapestry of light and shadow as curses and countercurses danced through the air. Voldemort tried to crush Harry with raw power. He forced the young wizard to the edge of collapse. Harry's wand trembled in his grip, and his scar throbbed. But in a fleeting moment, the memory of all who stood behind him, Ron and Hermione, the Weasleys, Sirius, Dumbledore, everyone who believed in him, flashed through Harry's mind, kindling a fierce determination in his chest. Drawing upon that hope, Harry rebounded with a wave of disarming spells. Their wands locked in a swirl of golden light, the hiss and crackle of magical energy reverberating through the fortress. Across the battlefield, Dumbledore engaged Bellatrix and other Death Eaters with swift, surgical proficiency. The Order, strengthened by the knowledge of Voldemort's mortality, cut down the remaining pockets of resistance. No longer was the Dark Lord the boogeyman of old. He was just one more wizard, albeit a powerful and fearsome one. Finally, with a roar of desperation, Voldemort poured everything he had into the killing curse. A sickly green aura shot forth from his wand, aimed directly at Harry. But at that same instant, Harry summoned a shield of brilliant, phoenix-like energy, a trick Dumbledore had taught him. The green light struck the radiant shield, reflecting back. There was no Horcrux to save Voldemort, no anchor to pull him back from the brink of death. In a split second, the very curse he cast hammered into his frail, broken soul. With an echoing scream, Lord Voldemort was blasted off his feet. His wand cracked in two under the force of his own lethal spell. Harry Potter stumbled, exhausted, as the lifeless body of Tom Riddle struck the cold stones. In the hush that followed, everyone held their breath. For a long moment, they waited, half expecting that black spirit to rise again. But nothing happened. Dawn broke over the shattered fortress in pale gold. Members of the Order carefully stepped around debris, administering first aid and lifting curses. Harry sank to his knees, the weight of a final victory pressing down on him. Dumbledore approached, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Harry," the old wizard said softly. "He's gone." The body of Tom Marvolo Riddle, once known as Voldemort, lay still and cold. Some of the Death Eaters, those not incapacitated, stared in numbed disbelief. Bellatrix Lestrange had been cornered and disarmed by a group of Aurors. She shrieked denials, insisting he must rise again, cursing the name of Potter for tainting her master's moment of triumph. But no unholy resurrection came. In the days that followed, the Wisengamot met in emergency session to deal with captured Death Eaters and bring them to trial. Testimonies poured in, revealing the full scope of Voldemort's tyranny. But the biggest shockwave was the final admission that his so-called Horcruxes had never really functioned. Ministry experts verified the destroyed artifacts: the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, each one incomplete. They found traces of magic consistent with the Horcrux ritual, but it was chaotic, botched. For some, that knowledge spurred ridicule. He who believed himself a god was undone by his own arrogance. Others felt pity. Imagine the depths of fear that would drive a man to cling so desperately to an illusion of immortality. Harry spent many evenings walking the grounds of Hogwarts or gazing at the night sky by the lake. The knowledge that Voldemort's power was built, in part on a faulty spell, brought him strange relief. It meant the Dark Lord hadn't just been defeated by prophecy or by chance, but by the inherent flaw in his twisted quest. Ron and Hermione shared Harry's relief. They had braced for the possibility that destroying the Horcruxes one by one would be necessary, a long and perilous mission. Instead, the revelation that those objects never anchored Voldemort had saved the wizarding world from a protracted campaign. "It's a blessing," Hermione said quietly, "but it's sobering too. All that devastation and loss, caused by a man terrified of death, yet never truly mastering the means to cheat it." Dumbledore, aged and weary, privately mourned the boy Tom Riddle had once been. The orphan, brilliant and hungry for recognition. In the end, Tom's refusal to trust anyone, his refusal to open his heart, had sealed his downfall. The headmaster hoped future generations would glean a lesson from the tragedy, that they might never repeat the footsteps leading down that dark path of obsession. In the years that followed, the wizarding world rebuilt. The scars of war ran deep, but hope was no longer overshadowed by a monstrous, immortal boogeyman. New laws were passed to foster unity among magical creatures. Hogwarts was restored to its rightful place as a safe haven for learning. The boy who lived finally found a measure of peace, no longer plagued by the lingering shadow of a foe who refused to die. The story of Voldemort's failed Horcruxes passed into legend. Most in the wizarding world learned a simplified version, that the Dark Lord had tried to achieve immortality through a vile ritual, but he had neglected a crucial element. The more scholarly among them saw it as the perfect embodiment of hubris, a man so obsessed with conquering death that he ironically kept too tight a grip on his soul to truly sunder it. At last, the cycle of fear and violence ended. There would be no dark resurrection, no final twist in the night. Tom Riddle's misguided dream of eternity turned to dust the moment that final killing curse rebounded. And so the wizarding world, having brushed against the edges of unthinkable darkness, found its way back to the light. The illusions of immortality proved to be as hollow as the heart of the man who sought it. The nightmares faded, replaced by a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, hope and unity could triumph without the shadow of a doomed wizard overshadowing their every breath. In time, Harry Potter grew up and lived free from the constant dread of a returning Voldemort. He told his children not just of the horrors of war, but also of the vanity that had undone the greatest dark wizard of the age. Immortality, in the end, was Voldemort's white whale, a pursuit that consumed him until it left him with nothing at all. From that ruin, the wizarding world took its greatest lesson. If you live in fear of death, you might lose every piece of your humanity trying to outrun it. And for a man like Tom Riddle, that fear proved to be the one enemy he could never truly overcome.